Okie All right, well, welcome everyone. This is the second installment of the McGill BioDesign / McGill aCADemy face shield workshop. So essentially in this iteration, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating the headband that goes around the individual's head. So we'll be CADing the part for that. And for the next one, we'll be focusing more on the actual shield itself and the assembly. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. And just let me know if you guys have any questions. We can get started. But essentially, I've created a new part file. And if you don't remember how to do that, you essentially go to File, New, and then you can click Part, right? Now, essentially, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to go in centimeters, grams, second. And this is important. As long as if your units are consistent between the two part files, you should be fine. But for added realism, we'll go with CGS units. So for the actual headband itself, this is going to be a very crude measurement, but essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure, the circumference of my head. So this wraps maybe around like halfway. So let's multiply this by 2, and that's our circumference. And the length of this ruler is approximately 40 centimeters. So our circumference needs to be 80 centimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new sketch. Right? And we're going to go on the top plane here. Now, when we do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a basic circle centered at the origin. So this automatically employs a constraint for us. Since it's centered at the origin, or since we created the sketch from there, it won't move with respect to that. It automatically creates a relation. And if you don't remember, relations are essentially our forms of constraints within sketches. So currently, our radius is 9 centimeters. This is far too small. Now we got to do the calculations. So say our circumference is 80 centimeters. What we're going to do is we're going to say, the circumference is 2 pi r. So we're going to divide the circumference by 2 pi to get our radius. So 80 divided by 2 divided by pi. We'll call it 13 centimeters for our radius. Again, this is all very crude. It's just for the purpose of approximation. All right, so now we have the inner contour of our of our headband. What we're going to do is we're going to actually offset this to actually give it a little bit of thickness. So in doing that, what I can do is click the Offset Entities tool. And essentially, as you can see here, it'll offset a new circle by 1 centimeter in this case. We can reverse it either way, but 1 centimeter in terms of our actual measurements is fairly standard. It's a pretty decent headband size. I'd say let's probably reduce it a little bit. Let's go with like 0.75. And again, this can all be updated, but I'm intending that we make this out of rubber just for the comfort of the individual. Now, as you can see, our sketch is underdefined here. And by that, it means, we have some dimensions that still need to be updated. So the most obvious one would be this inner circle. We haven't actually set it with a smart dimension tool. So by doing this, you'll notice the circle is actually entirely black now. Same with the one on the outside, because all aspects of its dimensions are defined. So for instance, its location is defined right here. If we click here, we have a coincident relation between the origin of the circle and the sketch origin. So that's good. As well, we also have the size of our circle, and we have the relative distance between these two. So we should be good to actually extrude this here. And as you can see, it says fully defined down there. So I'm going to click Extruded Boss/Base. And when I do this, you'll notice we have the option to extrude it by however much we want. Now, again, referring to my ruler, let's extrude this by 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters, and this is the overall height of the headband. So if we do that, we'll be left with this sort of object. It automatically selected the contour for us, but in the case that it gives you some sort of weird contour for some reason, we can go back to editing our feature. And within selected contours, you click this box and make sure it's highlighted like so. And essentially, you just click this inner ring. And then once you do that, again, it'll give you the same shape. All right, any questions so far? Okay, if not, then we'll go on to the next step. So the next logical step would be for the headband to actually be able to clip in to multiple locations. So you want it to be adjustable, right? Because not all heads come in the same size, evidenced by, my hair. It prevents me from wearing smaller headbands. So we'll adjust accordingly for that. So as a result of that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to update this sketch. And it can't be fused into one circle to begin with, because if you do that, you can't actually adjust the sketch. So I'm going to create a small little opening here. Let's say up here. So I'm going to draw 2 vertical lines emanating from the first circle. And, precision doesn't really matter at the moment. You can allow that to attach anywhere. And I'm going to draw another one too. And you'll say, hey, Nima, why are you drawing random lines like this? They're not straight at all. And that is something we can definitely fix here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on each line. And we're going to add a vertical relation to it. So as you can see, it's automatically adjusted itself. And we're going to do the same with the other one. Oh, it already has it. And that's probably because of the angle that it automatically applied for us. Sometimes SolidWorks does this. But that's good. But now, they're a bit off center. So we can fix that as well. Essentially, I'm going to create a new smart dimension. And we're going to click the bottom point of each of these little lines. And we're going to dimension it relative to our sketch origin. And let's say this gap is around 0.5 centimeters. Yeah, it's about 0.5 centimeters from either side. So it'll be 1 centimeter altogether. So we'll create another dimension to this other line. And we'll make that 0.5 as well. And as you can see, once more, we're fully defined. And these 2 lines are vertical with respect to how our sketch operates. So now what's left is to get rid of what's in the middle. So if you remember from the previous tutorial, we had the trim entities tool. And essentially, rather than deleting segments and drawing new segments, which would be an absolute pain, we can essentially infer what we want to get rid of. So within any type of closed contour, this tool removes intermediate lines. So there's one border here, there's another border here. So it gets rid of anything in between. It sort of automatically insinuates or assumes what you want to get rid of. So awesome. We're starting to look pretty good here. Now, the next step would be to actually create, clipping mechanisms of some sort. The method that I sort of devised would be to create some sort of like T-shaped object and disregard this part of the sketch. I'm just showing what the design decision is. And essentially, if you can imagine this, extruded in 3D, we'll extrude this upwards and it'll be able to sort of like wiggle its way within a hole and hold itself together through the T structure that we have here. It'll be a little bit more obvious when we actually design it. So let's get on with that. So let's get rid of all these lines and get back to our sketch. Now this is where our circular pattern tool will actually be very useful. So we're perpendicular to our sketch plane once more. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a couple of additional lines. Oh, it automatically inferred that it wanted to go there, but that is not the case. Oh, yikes. It keeps selecting these points by accident. My apologies. We can select other. So essentially what this allows us to do is select different points on our sketch, but it doesn't seem to be cooperating right now. That's okay. We can fix this up. We'll draw it within here. There we go. Yeah, SolidWorks can be a little bit finicky at times. But I'm just going to draw a general outline for the type of shape we want. This is by no means what it's actually going to look like, but it's more just a rough idea of what we want. And essentially, we've got that here. Now this looks pretty wonky, but we can fix that up. Firstly, what we can do is select these two at the same time. And, oh, sorry, my apologies. So this is already coincident, that's good. And this one as well is coincident too. And we can see that by this relation here. So essentially what we want is just for this to be symmetric, that's one part. And we also want the size to be adequate. So when we do that, we will create a smaller distance, let's say 0.5 centimeters between the two. And then for the actual shape itself, we want all of these objects to be perpendicular to one another. So we can add that relation. I pressed shift click and I selected these two. So now they're perpendicular. We'll do the same with this guy and this guy. They're already perpendicular. This one and this one, perpendicular, as well as this one and this one. And finally, this one and this one here. Awesome. So that's one part of it. As well, we want these two to be collinear to one another. So it shifts down. And essentially by collinear, it means, they're on the same line of action. So if that makes sense, if you draw a line that extends here, these two will follow the same line. So that's one part. And then what we want to do is just dimension these accordingly. So let's say this is around 0.5 centimeters as well. Same with this guy. And then all together, this one, this height of some sort, let's say it's around 0.25 centimeters. Yeah. And then we can reduce this length as well. We'll say that's like 1 centimeter. So we're getting there, it's the only concern is it's a little bit off center, which is not entirely what we want. So let me think, how else could we address this? So there's multiple ways of doing this. I'm just trying to think of the best one. I'm going to get rid of these lines, actually, these two. And I'm essentially going to draw a square instead. Yeah, this should be better. But a different type of square. So there should be one where we can select its bottom edges. Yes, this is the one we want. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a straight line extending from the bottom here. And then there we go. This is better. And then what we can do is essentially have everything attach onto here. Yeah, my apologies for the confusion there. So we'll say these two are, yeah, I'm probably just going to end up redrawing this, to be honest. Yeah, my apologies. This is a better way of going at it. So I'm just going to create a new square that extends like we did before. And then essentially extend this one outwards. So let's see. We'll create a couple of new lines and keep those dimensions that we had before in check. Working with circles can always be a little bit finicky, but hey, it is what it is sometimes. Okay, and we'll add our relations just to straighten everything up. So these two are collinear. This one's perpendicular. It's already perpendicular, perfect. And this one's perpendicular as well. As for the lengths, so this one's going to be 0.5 inches. This one's going to be 0.5 as well. And then I think we said 0.25 for these side edges here. Let's make it around 0.3 actually. That's probably better. And then all together, this one, we'll say around 0.5, and then we'll reduce the overall width. So we'll actually select these two lines. You'll see why in a second. And we'll make this 0.5. Awesome, this looks a lot better. Now it's not fully constrained, but first I'm going to get rid of a few lines. So obviously we don't want this line in the middle here. And the reason for that is because you can see these two sides are actually, they're clear. So they're not filled within. So that means this contour is closed in the middle. And essentially there's these two different contours that are essentially separate from the main contour. So that's not something we want. So I'll get rid of that, get rid of anything in between, and that's one step. Now the other thing is, if you remember, we created a square. So essentially, if we create a square, you'll see there's two different lines here. One is from our circle, and then the other is from the square that we created, or the rectangle. That's probably better. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the power trim tool to get rid of the rectangle's bottom side length, such that this is only intersecting the circle. And we can ensure this by exiting out of that, clicking on each point. So as you can see, it's a bit disconnected, and checking if it's coincident. So it already is coincident with one part of the circle. And then if we go to the other one, this one's already coincident as well. You can see that right here. So awesome. Now we don't even need this line in between this object here. We can get rid of that. But actually, no, I'm going to keep it because for our first step, we need the circle to be completely solid. So we'll disregard that. So that's it so far. Now, the reason why this sketch is still blue is because of the fact that we haven't actually established what the location of this part of the sketch is. So as a result, it doesn't really know where to place it. So I'm going to use dimensions to ensure that this is not the case. So I'm just going to create some arbitrary dimensions with what we already have. We don't really care about precision right now. Let's say this is like 2. And then in terms of this one, we'll add that to the mix. So this one we'll say it's around like 2.5. And there we go. We have the bottom half sort of set up. It sort of warped our shape though. So that means we haven't constrained something properly. So let's go back and check these relations. So that's perpendicular. This one's perpendicular as well. So this one needs to be collinear to that one. And let's just say this one needs to be perpendicular to that. And this one needs to be perpendicular to that. Okay, that's a bit better. Yeah. And these two are perpendicular. And then these two should be perpendicular as well. So that helps out a bit. Let's see. We're just missing a few relations. So it's always tricky finding things like this. It can be a bit of a pain. So these are parallel. And these should be collinear. I presume it's also going to want to ask us for this length too. That's probably the issue here. Let's get rid of that and apply a new dimension. Okay. And we want it relative to this. There we go. Much better. So, okay. This one, this point, we don't even need it, so I got rid of it. So our sketch is now fully defined. This is perfect. Now, what we want to do is we want to have multiple options available for us to select from. So essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the circular pattern tool to our disposal. So you click within this toolbar here. And from there, you can select this. Sorry, my apologies. You can select these entities to pattern. So I'm going to click on here as well, just all of what we just created. And then I'm going to use the circular pattern tool to actually pattern it. Now, for some reason, it's selecting our circle as well, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go back and do what we just did right from the get-go. Okay. I guess it should be fine. Yeah, no need to worry about it too much. Now, I'm going to establish a certain angle or the space between each of these iterations. So let's say it's around 15 degrees or 30 degrees. Actually, let's say around 40 degrees. Yeah, that's probably best. There we go. And as you can see, it's created multiple instances of what we just created. And this makes our work a lot more convenient. So I just made 5 different iterations. And as you can see, it includes one, then it creates 4 additional ones. So this certainly helps out. And if we press OK here, you'll notice we have fully patterned our object. Now, for the sake of this tutorial, I don't think I'm going to get into the dimensions of these guys too much, but just know that they are the same and usually they should be fully defined. So I'm just going to attach one dimension like that. Okay, let's just move on to the next step. We'll worry about definitions later. So if we press OK, now what we need is some holes for each of these little plugs to fit into, right? So in order to do that, we're going to make use of our rectangle tool again, in particular, the 3-point rectangle that we used before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new 3-point rectangle. Oh, whoops, my apologies. And it should be along this circle. There we go. Now it's not exactly perfect, but we can make it perfect. Now the first thing is, if you notice, this object here is essentially 2 centimeters away from our sketch origin. So we can make that symmetric. We'll say the outer edge of this rectangle that we just made is 2 centimeters away. And as well, the hole needs to be snug enough such that it fits this little width here. So these 2 different objects. It needs to fit 0.5 inches worth of material. So if we zoom out and go back to our little square here, or a rectangle, my apologies. We'll make that 0.5 inches, centimeters, my apologies. So that's the first step. Now, the next logical step would be to actually cut this out of our circle, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim all the excess on the top. So that's one part. And then on the bottom, we have this portion sticking out. So we don't want that. We'll get rid of that. And now, as you can see, we've lost a lot of our relations because we had to actually trim everything. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to dimension this once more. So this should be, these 2 should be 0.5 inches apart. And then with regard to their actual point locations, we have to add some more dimensions like so. There we go. So this is a bit better. And as you can see, this is what seems to be a closed contour because of the fact that we use the trim tool. And as you can see, if I select this outer part of the circle, everything else sort of fills in automatically, if that makes sense. So if I click that edge, you can see everything around that point is solid. So this is good. Otherwise, if this was not a closed contour, the whole thing would become solid, like as we can see here, or slightly shaded. So that's one part. We can also check on this end too. So this is coincident here, and this is coincident here. So these 2 points are closed as well. So then what we can do is use our circular sketch pattern again. Now, if we do that, essentially what we can do is select our entities once more. So these 2, and then we can set the same angles that we had before. So I think it was around 40 degrees that we set before with 5 iterations. And what you can do, see it's going in the opposite side, we'll rotate it such that it's flipped. I'll check with our previous pattern once more. Let's see. We'll edit this pattern. So everything seemed to be 10 degrees apart. Okay, with 5 instances. So we'll do that. So as for this pattern, okay, this already updated it for us. So our guess was correct. So now these are our holes. We've got them ready. Again, I'm not going to dimension them, but usually you should, just to make sure everything is black. And we're going to move on with the next step. So then the next step would be to actually create a place for the mask to fit in, right? So it's a little bit tricky to show like this. So I'm going to actually show you the source of inspiration for what we had. So if I click on the standard face shield design and go around here, yeah, exactly, this one. Now, if we look on this face shield, we have these sort of button clips at the top where the face mask is actually supposed to fit. Oh, geez. There we go. So those little circular portions right here. This is what clips into our headband. So essentially, we need to have some sort of protrusion that comes out and can do the same thing that we're doing with our headband, but now with our face shield. So essentially, what we can do is we can reuse these little clips that we had up here, right? And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mirror. So I'm going to mirror one instance of this one along the x-axis in this case, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a center line. So this is a type of reference geometry. It's not going to actually contribute to the construction of our object. And we'll draw that across such that we have an axis upon which to sort of reflect upon, if that makes sense, or to mirror about. And if we press mirror entities and click entities to mirror, so we'll go with this little object that we created here. And we're going to mirror it about our center line. We'll actually choose a different instance, yeah, because this seems to be too central. Let's go with one that's more on the outer edge. This one seems to be a pretty decent choice, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So if I press these shapes and mirror it about our new center line, you'll see essentially what we'll have is the exact same shape, just on the bottom here. So if we do press OK here, that's one. Now you see we need it on the other side too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another center line that goes from the bottom here. And we can essentially extend it up to here. You know, it doesn't really matter. As long as if it's vertical, it's fine. And you can check this by checking its relations. So we'll add a vertical relation to it. There we go. Now we're going to reflect the same thing that we created about this new center line that we just made. So I'm going to get rid of this point. And we can press mirror about, and we'll click this line. And there we go. So now we have our clip positions. Now, I don't know. I personally, when I see this, maybe this pattern was probably the better choice. So I'm going to edit this pattern now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this relation here. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Okay, and what we can do is click on display delete relations. So there should be, it's okay. We'll keep this for now, just for the purpose of this tutorial. So now we should be fine with extrusion. Oh, 1 second. As you can see, this actually updated our feature because we created some new interior contours. Now what we have to do is actually select our first extrusions contours once more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these boxes, and we can reuse the shapes within them later on. And this will create one solid extrusion similar to what we had before, except now we have this sort of gap in between. So that helps out. And now we can make use of our other shapes by clicking on this down arrow here. And as you can see, it's underdefined. In normal practice, you want it to be fully defined, but for the sake of this, session, it'll take too much time. So that's something I recommend trying out at home. But we have all of our different contours here. So there's a couple of different functions we need to do, and I'll show you how to do them. So first, let's actually extrude these little sort of T sections here. So I'll click Features, Extruded Boss / Base, and I'll extrude. I'll just click on the sketch here. And you can select new contours, which is great. So I'm going to select, if I make this normal, I'm going to select this contour. So this one, this one, this one, and this one. The first two will replace and actually click their contours. Nice. Now, as you can see, this will actually go the full distance, but this isn't necessarily what we want. We want it to not follow the full thickness of the headband and actually to sort of fall in between. So we can update this. We can actually start from a little higher than what we normally want. So let's say we'll go from, and we'll press offset. So this is offset from our sketch plane. Let's say 0.5 centimeters away from where we started. So that's good. And then as for the actual extrusion itself, well, we added 0.5 centimeters. We want to go 0.5 centimeters from the top. So that means this extrusion should only be an inch thick, right? And I'll select these two bottom contours for the same purpose. And hopefully this cooperates. There we go. And if we press OK, it looks something similar to this, right? And now, as you can see, if we actually have our holes for our object, you can essentially tuck these rubber types of T sections within, and it'll essentially buckle around the hole, and it'll hold itself in place. So that's a pretty simple way of making your design adjustable to whatever your client's heads or dimensions are. As well, we're not quite done yet. What we need to do is we need to actually cut holes for each of these holes to fit into, except for these two. These two are for the shield itself. So I'm going to click Extruded Cut instead, which is the opposite of Extruded Boss / Base. And I'm going to click on one of these sketches here. And we'll delete that, make our plane normal once more. And I'm just going to hide this extrusion first, just so we can see our sketch, and press Extruded Cut again. Okay, so now I'll click each of these different sections. And now what we want to do is we want to actually create a hole large enough for these T sections, but not so large that you're just dividing your headband into multiple pieces. So we'll apply the same type of principles that we had before, right? So if I press from, oh, my apologies. Let's do that again. Oh, someone just entered the waiting room. Okay, we'll start this. I have a better method for this actually. So I'm gonna disregard this previous method. Sorry about that. And we'll create a new reference plane for this. And you'll see why I'm going to do this in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually click from where our sketch plane was. So just give it a moment. There we go. So our sketch plane was on the bottom of this headband. So we'll press OK there. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually offset it. Now, if you remember, our previous offset was 0.5 inches away from the actual sketches, from the actual sketch plane for our previous object. So if I flip the offset, you'll notice we're actually going to start right underneath each of these little T sections, which is exactly what we want. Now, if we press OK here, we have a plane that sort of intersects right there, and we're going to create a new sketch on top of that plane. Now, the reason why I had to do this is because of the nature of the Extruded Cut tool. If you noticed, when I actually tried to make the extruded cut with each of these little sections, it didn't allow us to actually offset the cut by any degree, which is unfortunate. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating the exact same sketch, but on a new plane, so that we could actually make the cut without having to actually offset it from where our sketch plane is. So to make this super easy and not have to repeat all of the work that we already did, we'll use the Convert Entities tool, which is something I showed in the previous tutorial. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the circle as well as each of these little portions here, these little holes or these notches that we created. So we'll slice these guys up and press OK. Nice. Now what the Convert Entities tool actually does is it takes geometry that you've already created, whether it be, an actual sketch plane, or I'm sorry, an actual feature or a sketch itself, and it projects it onto your current sketch plane, if that makes sense. So essentially you're copying something from like one distance and you're essentially shining a light onto another distance and sandwiching it together. So that's what we've done. And now if you notice on our new sketch plane, we've copied our sketch. So that's extremely useful. We've missed these outer lines, so we'll add those. And if we press OK, there you go. It's fully closed once more. And now we can make our extruded cut. So if I press the Extruded Cut tool, and for our contours, we'll select the new objects that we created. You'll notice they cut perfectly. And if you remember, our previous extrusion was only 1 inch thick, and that's exactly what we want here. So if we press that, there we go. We've created holes in which these little T sections will fall within. Now you can play around with the size, make it more realistic if you'd like, but this is sort of a general idea of what you do. So then we can hide that. And now all that's left is really just, detailing. So we can add materials to this. So if I click here, so this tab is called Appearances, Scenes, and Decals, or Details, however you pronounce it. You go into Appearances, and then within here, you can choose different appearances. Now, for the purpose of this, we'll go with rubber, because realistically, that's what's going to be going around the heads of your clients. You could choose plastic or anything like that as well. And we'll go with matte rubber. Now, if we apply this and hold our mouse in the location that it was, you can apply to a singular feature. So in this case, the feature that was selected was the actual extrusion that we made in the beginning. You can apply it to a face, a body, so things that are merged together, or you can apply it to the whole part. Now in this case, we'll apply it to the whole part because everything is of one, tree or of one branch. So there we go. This is technically a rubber type object. And oh, we have something in the chat. Oh yeah, no worries. Thanks for coming, Julia. All right. And then after that, all that's left is, if you want, you can add some fillets. So fillets are little tools you can add to round edges. For the case of this, I'm just going to leave it untouched and as it is. And that essentially wraps up our headband design. So it's something very preliminary, but you could make it in a few minutes and it won't be any issue in that regard. So that essentially concludes the first part of our actual face shield design. The second part will be out next weekend. Now, in the meantime, I'll ask questions and I'll stop the recording. So let's, how do I do that again? Here we go.